Hello, Remy and Max. You played a very interesting game, I think last Sunday, and I'm going to very quickly go through it with you. I'm not going to talk about everything, but there are three things in particular that I'm going to address over the course of the video. Let's jump in. So we begin with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, knight c3, knight f6, and bishop to c4. A very common opening, especially in scholastic chess, but black has a really good response to this. It's what we call the fork trick. Knight takes e4, and black is at least equal here. So white's best is to take, black plays d5, bishop to d3 is the best move, takes, bishop to d6, not queen to d6, sorry, but bishop to d6, and the position is equal. There are other things that white can try along the way, but they're all actually worse. Like bishop takes f7 is not very good, because king f7, knight e4, d5, and black's two bishops and big pawn center is going to give black the upper hand. And there are some other inferior tries too. The important thing is knight takes e4 is really, really good. If you want to play a position like that, the way to do it would be to start with bishop c4, let's say knight f6, and then you go d3, not knight to c3, because knight takes e4 would be the exact same thing. So you go d3, and then you can play knight to c3 after that. So that's an option if you really like that setup. But we want to avoid the fork trick. Okay, that was the first thing. All right, moving on to the game, bishop to b4, castles here, and now knight to g5. Okay, in the game, black played bishop to g4 first, and white probably could have taken on f7, although it's kind of tricky. Instead, queen to e1 happened, and castles. So either way, let's say just from here, keeping it simple. The important thing to realize is that this attack against f7, while you always want to be on the lookout for it, it doesn't really work very well here. So when black can castle, unless you have queen to h5 as a follow-up, which you don't here because this great knight on f6 is covering that square, so we don't have that. All we've got in this position is just the attack here. The thing is, you do not want to take when black is getting the two pieces for the rook and the pawn. So the side that gets the two minor pieces, the side that gets the bishop and the knight, is almost always going to be doing much better than the side that gets the rook and the pawn. And the reason is that the rook has a really hard time making its presence felt in the opening and in the middle game. Only when it's an endgame, generally speaking, when the board is wide open, does the rook really become as powerful a piece as it can be. So in the middle game, you don't want to make that trade. So you therefore don't want to play knight to g5 when black is ready to just castle, or if black has already castled. All right, and this happens in both directions. So let me just kind of zip ahead to this point over here. So black does the same thing with knight to g4, and white just says, yeah, please, go ahead, h3, and we had this double trade, and once again, this was quite helpful for white. So that trade is just generally not a good idea. One quick tactical point I would note is that if knight takes f2, then yes, this would be the way to go. But in the game with bishop takes f2, remember, we're not playing checkers. You don't have to take. And if white goes king to h1, black is going to lose a piece. Because if the knight saves itself, then the bishop is lost. And if the bishop saves itself, then the knight is lost. So it's very, very natural to just automatically recapture. But sometimes it's better to just kind of wait and check and make sure that you might not have something better. Okay, so the last thing I want to discuss, and this comes up quite a few times, primarily for Max, is that when you jump in with pieces and you got a position where there are multiple captures that are possible, you got to make sure to count out the captures for both sides and make sure that you're okay. So here, for instance, black played knight to e2 check, and it's a nice square. It's a great square for the knight if it can stay there, or if a black piece can stay there. But the problem is that white's got 1-2 guys attacking that square, and black only has one defender. Okay, and later on in the game, so let's say over here, so white played d4, white's got 2 guys attacking the pawn on e5, black's only got one defender. So you need to either defend it again, let's say with f6, or just make the capture on d4. And I think this comes up again, yeah, so like here, for example, yeah, so here white's threatening this guy twice, so rook to c7 would have been a better way to save the rook, keeping this protected. So remember, when there are multiple captures possible, count them out, and that'll save you a lot of trouble. I think that's a really helpful thing. Beware of the fork trick, and giving up two minor pieces for a rook and a pawn is usually not such a great idea in the opening and middle game.